It's always around 3 a.m., isn't it? Not when the world is loud. Not when they're distracted. Not when friends are texting, work is buzzing, or pride is still doing its job. No. It happens when the night goes still enough for truth to crawl out of hiding. When the room is dark, the body is tired, the phone is face down, and the silence gets so thick it starts sounding like your name. That's when the avoidant feels it. Not in the dramatic way people imagine, not with tears on command or some cinematic confession whispered into the dark. It's quieter than that, stranger than that, more psychological, more cruel. Because when an avoidant loses a high-value woman, what keeps them awake at 3 a.m. is not always the loss itself. It's the fact that they can no longer control the distance. And that truth is brutal. Because part of you still wants to believe that if they were cold, they never cared. If they pulled away, they must have forgotten. If they stayed silent, maybe you meant less than you hoped. But that isn't always what happened. Sometimes they didn't stop caring. They got overwhelmed. They felt too much, too fast, too deep, and instead of moving closer, their entire system interpreted love like pressure, intimacy like danger, consistency like the beginning of dependence. And for someone wired around emotional self-protection, dependence does not feel romantic. It feels fatal. That is what so many people misunderstand about avoidant attachment. They think avoidants are calm because they are unaffected, but many avoidants are not calm. They are flooded. Their nervous system just learned very early that the safest way to survive being flooded is to shut the door before anyone sees the water rising. So when they met a woman who was emotionally grounded, self-respecting, magnetic without begging, soft without collapsing, available without chasing, something inside them lit up and panicked. Because a high-value woman doesn't just attract an avoidant, she exposes them. She exposes the part of them that wants closeness but doesn't know how to hold it. The part that craves devotion but feels trapped when it arrives. The part that wants to be chosen but becomes restless when someone truly sees them. That contradiction is where the 3 a.m. haunting begins. By day, they can rationalize it. They tell themselves, "You were too intense, too emotional, too much expectation, too available, too sharp, too good, too something." They build stories that protect their distance, because distance is the one thing their body still mistakes for safety. But at 3 a.m., the stories lose oxygen. The brain is tired. Defenses are weaker. Dopamine from distraction is gone. The nervous system has less noise to hide inside. And suddenly, what they pushed away in daylight comes back as sensation. A song. A sentence. Your last look. The moment you stopped explaining. The version of you that finally went quiet. And that quiet is what gets them. Because the core concept here isn't jealousy. It isn't revenge. It isn't even love in the way people cheaply use that word. It's silence. Silence is what reprograms the entire dynamic. Not performative silence, not the childish kind designed to provoke. I'm talking about the deep silence of a woman who finally withdraws her energy. A woman who stops auditioning for empathy. A woman who no longer bleeds in front of someone just to prove she has a heart. That silence does something almost surgical to the avoidant mind. Because while you were chasing clarity, they could stay in control. While you were sending paragraphs, they could keep translating your pain into pressure. While you were trying to fix the rupture, They could avoid actually feeling the rupture. But the moment your energy disappears, the emotional math changes. Now there is no external stimulus to react against, no message to mute, no call to decline, no emotional wave to defend from, no reassurance to half accept and half reject. Now there is just them, and what your absence activates inside them. And that is when the real spiral starts. At 3 a.m., they replay things they pretended not to notice. The way you looked at them without trying to own them. The way your presence felt peaceful instead of chaotic. The way you understood their silence more than they deserved. The way you gave warmth without demanding performance. The way you began to leave, emotionally, before you left physically. They notice that. Oh, they notice. Not always when it's happening. Sometimes avoidants only understand the value of emotional safety after they've driven it away. In the moment, consistency can feel suffocating because their amygdala, the part of the brain wired to detect threat, is not making clean distinctions. It can confuse closeness with engulfment. A simple emotional need can feel like a demand. A loving conversation can trigger cortisol like conflict. So they detach, not because nothing is there, but because too much is there, and their system has no graceful language for too much. So they go cold. They delay replies. They act tired. They become vague. They create confusion where there was once warmth. And you, if you don't understand the pattern, start shrinking around their discomfort. You become hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant. You monitor tone, timing, word choice. You begin to wonder if love is something you have to dilute in order to keep. That is where so many women lose themselves. Not in heartbreak, in adaptation. In slowly betraying their own emotional truth just to remain digestible to someone afraid of intimacy. And here is the truth that changes everything. The moment you stop adapting to their avoidance, their body finally has to meet the consequences of what they were doing. Not your anger, not your speeches. The consequences. Your stillness, your absence, your emotional unavailability to dysfunction. That is when 3 a.m. becomes a mirror. They pick up the phone, put it down, unlock your chat, stare at the thread, scroll up to old messages they once answered with dry little fragments, and suddenly those fragments feel embarrassing. They revisit your photos not because they forgot what you looked like, but because they forgot what they felt like around you. That's different. They wonder if you're talking to someone else. They wonder if you moved on cleanly. They wonder if your silence means relief. They wonder if they misread your softness as weakness when it was actually restraint. They wonder if you were the one person who saw through the armor and stayed kind anyway. And the more high value you were, the worse this gets. Because a high value woman does not leave chaos behind her. She leaves contrast. After her, casual attention feels empty. Surface-level conversations feel mechanical. New people may look appealing, but they do not regulate the nervous system the same way. They do not carry the same depth. They do not create the same emotional imprint. They may distract, but they do not replace. And avoidants often confuse replacement with relief. At first, they feel relief. Space, freedom, no perceived pressure, no emotional accountability, no one reaching into the places they work so hard to keep closed. But relief is not the same as peace. Relief is the drop in tension after escape. Peace is what remains when there is nothing left to run from. At 3 a.m., they find out which one they actually have. And many of them discover, too late, that what they called needing space was sometimes just an attempt to escape the vulnerability your presence demanded. Not because you were wrong, because you were real. Real love terrifies people whose survival depended on emotional distance. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it explains the split. This is why some avoidants secretly do the most contradictory things in the middle of the night. They check your last scene and tell themselves it means nothing. They type messages they never send. They stalk quietly, not because they are confident you'll be there, but because they are terrified you won't. They revisit the exact moments where they felt themselves getting attached and then immediately shut down. They remember the night you asked a simple question and they felt strangely cornered by the intimacy of being known. They remember how safe you were, and how unbearable that safety became once it started requiring emotional presence in return. Because deep down, avoidant behavior is often a war between longing and self-protection. Dopamine craves the connection. The body remembers the comfort. But the nervous system, trained by older wounds, says, "Careful. Too close means loss of control. Too attached means eventual pain. Too seen means expectation. Too loved means you could be hurt." So they pull away before the closeness fully lands. Then they lie awake, grieving the very thing they interrupted. That is the tragedy of it. But let me tell you where women make the mistake. The moment they sense the avoidant missing them, they rush back in to soothe the discomfort. They break the silence too early. They answer half-effort with full heart. They interpret resurfacing as transformation. They get one late-night text, one vague "been thinking about you," one breadcrumb of softness, and suddenly the old hope starts breathing again. Be careful, because missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Obsession is not healing. Longing is not capacity. Regret is not emotional maturity. Yes, they may think about you at 3 a.m. Yes, they may feel your absence in their chest. Yes, they may replay your voice, your energy, your standards, your warmth. But if they have not confronted the pattern, they will use reconnection the same way they once used distance, to regulate themselves. And a woman with self-worth does not return just because she became unforgettable. She returns only where safety has become mutual. That is the warning. Do not romanticize being deeply missed by someone who still cannot hold intimacy without turning it into confusion. Do not let their insomnia become your invitation. Do not mistake their late-night vulnerability for sustainable change. If the pattern is unbroken, the cycle will simply become more sophisticated. They will come closer, then retreat with better wording. They will sound more self-aware, but still disappear when closeness reaches the threshold that activates fear. They will tell you they've never felt this way before, and maybe that part is true. But truth without regulation is still unstable. And instability, no matter how poetic, will drain your soul. You were not made to become smaller so someone else can tolerate love. You were not made to translate your needs into silence so another person's nervous system stays comfortable. You were not made to be almost chosen. This is the shift. The real power dynamic changes the moment you stop measuring your worth by whether an avoidant can finally access their feelings for you. Because the deeper question was never, "Do they miss me?" The deeper question is, why was I ever willing to call inconsistency love just because it came with chemistry? That is where the transformation begins. When you understand that your value was never in how patiently you endured someone's detachment, it was in the emotional standard you represented. It was in the safety you brought. It was in the honesty, the depth, the steadiness, the feminine self-respect that forced hidden wounds to the surface. You did not fail because they pulled away. You revealed the fracture. And some people would rather lose a rare connection than face the architecture of their own defenses. That is not your shame. That is their unfinished work. So, yes, maybe at 3 a.m. they are thinking about the woman who did not beg, the woman who loved deeply but did not abandon herself, the woman whose silence said more than her explanations ever could, the woman who became unreachable not because she was playing a game, but because she finally understood that access to her is sacred. That memory stays. It stays in the body, in the pause before they text someone new, in the dullness of shallow conversations, in the restless nights where distraction fails, in the unsettling realization that the one person who felt like peace was also the one they could not control once she chose herself. And that is what truly haunts them. Not that you loved them, that you stopped offering that love where it was not being honored. There is immense power in that kind of withdrawal, not because it manipulates, because it clarifies. It teaches the nervous system, yours especially, that love should not require self-erasure, that attraction without safety is not intimacy, that being desired is not the same as being cherished, that your softness is not a resource for emotionally unavailable people to consume while giving you confusion in return. You do not need to become colder to win. You need to become clearer. Clearer about what your body feels around inconsistency. Clearer about what your mind keeps trying to excuse. Clearer about the difference between empathy and self-abandonment. Clearer about the fact that someone can care and still be unsafe. Someone can miss you and still repeat the wound. Someone can feel deeply and still lack the capacity to love in a way that protects your peace. That clarity is where your identity changes. Because once you truly understand this, you stop waiting to be recognized by people who only know your value in your absence. You stop performing emotional miracles for those who call depth too much, simply because it reaches places they have spent a lifetime avoiding. You stop chasing closure from nervous systems that confuse intimacy with loss of freedom. And you become something else. You become unavailable to confusion. You become allergic to mixed signals. You become the woman whose presence is warm, but whose standards are immovable. The woman who can feel everything without collapsing into pursuit. The woman who no longer panics when someone withdraws because she knows that another person's avoidance is not a referendum on her worth. It is information, and information is power. So let them sit with the silence if they chose it. Let them meet themselves in the dark if distance was their language. Let them learn, in the cruel honesty of 3 a.m., that losing a high-value woman does not feel like losing attention. It feels like losing access to emotional safety they were not mature enough to receive. And you? You keep becoming. You keep healing. You keep building a life so rooted in self-respect that no one's inconsistency can hypnotize you out of your truth again. Because your power was never in being the woman they could not forget. Your power is in being the woman who no longer needs to be remembered to know who she is. And once that settles into your bones, once your nervous system no longer confuses longing with love, once your self-worth becomes louder than your desire to be chosen, everything changes. You stop asking whether they're awake at 3 a.m. thinking about you, and start thanking God you're finally asleep in your own peace.